And so much more interesting for me than just basically looking at my blank screen and hoping that somebody out there is paying attention and is interested. So yeah, so look, this session is an introduction to Power BI. I heard the intro. I gather from some of the questions already that there are people amongst you who know some about Power BI. Maybe some of you know a lot about Power BI. That's fine as well. Inevitably, to do a comprehensive introductory course, we have to sort of cover stuff that probably some of you are going to know some of each piece of this, or one piece of it you'll know to some extent. So just keep that in mind. If you know it, obviously, I'm sorry about that, but maybe just seeing it all together may be useful as well. I won't spend a lot of time on my intro. Phil already gave me an intro, but yeah, just my background. Before I did this, I used to work for Coca-Cola. I spent 25 years and had a really enjoyable career working in a business selling soft drinks. It was a fabulous business to work in, and I spent time in the business and also doing IT roles. And I've been doing this consulting work now for 7 years, and frankly, great time to get into this space. If you like data, and if you're sort of one of these fringe dwellers that you're not quite a business person, you're not quite an IT person, but you love data, you know, Power BI is one of these great products that allows people like me to have a job specializing in what I'm doing. And this is the book that Phil referred to. This is currently in its 3rd edition, and it's really a DAX book. It'll teach you how to write DAX in Power BI. Okay, so the objective of the session is to give a broad understanding of what's possible. It's certainly not everything. In fact, since I first started teaching this course, it's those updates like Jonathan just presented that actually makes it very difficult to keep up to date with everything. It's so big now that literally I think almost one person can't do it all. And there are areas where I sort of certainly haven't had a lot of personal experience, although I do have an understanding. So I don't have time to teach the concepts, but you know, if you get a good taste for it, then there are things that you can follow up if you're interested in particular areas. So I'd like to start off with an introductory about what Power BI is, because it's actually a huge topic, as we mentioned. And so Power BI is a lot of things. And so I like to think of it as an ecosystem. So the Power BI ecosystem starts with this product, Power BI Desktop. And this is a free piece of software. In fact, I would say it is the best free piece of software you'll get anywhere for data and analytics. And it's similar to Excel, so it's installed on your Windows PC, and you can load data, and you can build reports, and you can save the file, and you can email them to your friends, and they can download the free version and open the file and do all the same, all for free. Pretty amazing piece of free software. But it's not really designed to work that way. It's not designed like Excel, where you create a file and then send it to a friend. It's designed for you to build a report and then publish that report into the cloud. So powerbi.com, also known as the Power BI service. And this is also free for everyone, as long as you've got a work email address. Now, what I mean by that is that it will not work on a Gmail account or a Hotmail account for that matter. So you must have a school or a work email address, and then everyone can get themselves a free account and publish their work up into the cloud and then consume it through a browser. In fact, once it's published in the cloud, you can consume it in many ways. The browser is the most common way, which is great if you've got a Mac, because you can still consume these reports without having to use Power BI Desktop and have a Windows environment. And then there's also mobile apps, phone apps, tablet apps, and a few other things. All of this is free until you want to share your work with somebody else. Then you have to pay. And I think fair is fair. I think it's still a fabulous piece of software. Microsoft wants everyone to be able to use it. But if you've built something that's of value and you want to share it to somebody else, hey, how about you chip a bit of money in Microsoft's way to help pay for the literally billions of dollars that they spent developing this software. And so once you start to share, both you, the person who's doing the sharing, and the person who's receiving the content, they both must have a license. And it's pretty cheap. I'm assuming it's similar to Australia. It's about $13 per user per month, $150 per year, orders of magnitude. Now, this is the main path of data, but you can also load data from what's called a template app. And this is really designed as a third-party service offering. It's useful if there are companies with online data sources like Google Analytics or Salesforce.com. They can actually build apps and deploy them directly into the cloud without you having to do the Power BI desktop piece at all. Now, this is a big and growing area of Power BI, and I think in the future, template apps will be a larger part of the ecosystem as companies, software vendors build solutions and deploy them through the cloud. So that's also part of Power BI. There's also this thing called a Power BI gateway. The best way to describe that is it's like a VPN, a virtual private network connection. So if you have to use a VPN to connect to your work environment, it's basically the same concept. So it's a secure connection between your operating environment, typically within inside your organization, and back to powerbi.com so that those two locations can securely communicate with each other without your data being at risk across the internet. And then there's two other broad areas. So there's what I call these umbrella products. So Power Pivot for Excel and Power Query for Excel. In fact, these two technologies precede Power BI as a product. So both of these technologies live inside Power BI, but they also live inside Excel. And in fact, Power Pivot for Excel, I want to say now is sort of orders of magnitude about 9 years old, maybe even 10 years old, maybe even 11 years old. I'm losing track because it was first released for Excel 2010. So they probably started developing it in sort of 2009 or thereabouts. So once you learn these tools, Power Query and the data modeling engine in Power BI, you can use these skills directly inside Excel as well. So this is also part of Power BI as far as I'm concerned anyway. And then there's this growing list of other things like Report Server, which is like an on-premise version of PowerBI.com. So some companies don't like going out into the cloud. Power BI Premium is a licensing approach. So different way, it's like a capacity-based license. So you pay per capacity rather than per user. And then Report Builder is a bit like a paginated report. So if you need to print reports on A4 paper or something like that, you would use Report Builder. So all of this is the Power BI ecosystem, and it's growing on an ongoing basis, and so it's not just one product. So a couple of things to sort of set the record straight about what it is and is not. So Power BI is definitely not Excel. And in fact, often people get in trouble when they start their Power BI journey because often people come from an Excel background. In fact, people come from two broad groups. They either come from an Excel background or a SQL Server background, generically speaking. And so if you're coming from an Excel background, you should be clear that it's a different product. Power BI is a database, it's not a spreadsheet. But Power BI is also not a relational database. So it's not Microsoft Access and it's not Microsoft SQL Server. They're different products. They serve a different purpose. Power BI is, in fact, a reporting database. It was built with Excel users front of mind. The language was built to be sympathetic to an Excel user, someone who's learnt about functions. I talk about this, it being a functional language. So what I mean by that is Excel has a function called the sum function. Everyone who uses Excel knows the sum function. Sum function is a black box. You pass it some parameters and Excel will add up the numbers for you. That's what a function does. And so the language of Power BI was built for Excel users who are familiar with a functional language. And so it's very good for Excel users. Also, Power BI is not the solution to all your reporting problems. Okay, you can't just ask someone to come and install Power BI and all of your master data problems have gone away. All of your discipline about reporting and analytics have gone away. It's a great tool, but it's not a silver bullet to solve all your problems. There are other things that you have to do. But it is a significant step forward for desktop developers. We call them citizen reporting people. And it's also a step forward for enterprise analytics. And the good thing is that it serves both of those markets. So you can actually, as a citizen developer, you can build a desktop report, and then over time it can become a major part of the overall business reporting, and you can promote it as part of the enterprise reporting structure. Also, Power BI is not something you'll pick up without any effort. It's not PowerPoint, right? You're not just going to pick it up and quickly draw a couple of slides and not have to think too much about it. It's harder than that. But it is something that everyone can learn, provided you invest the time that you need to invest in order to learn these things. And there's different levels of skill, of course, as there are with everything. But so just to set the scenes on a couple of things there. Now, I always like to show this slide before I get into a demo. So this will be my last slide, apart from a couple of summary slides. But I like to group Power BI tasks into 4 major areas, which I think help set the scene for how to build a report. And so the first stage of any report is what I would call data acquisition, or it's also sometimes called ETL, extract, transform, and load. And in short, data acquisition is the process of connecting to the data source, whatever that might be. So it could be a CSV or a SQL database, or it could be a web page or an Excel file. And in fact, there's almost, or orders of magnitude, 200 different types of data that you can connect to. And the first step is to load it into the Power BI database. And remember, I said before, Power BI is not Excel, so it is a database and it has a database structure. And so getting the data into Power BI, into the database, is the first step. Now, once the data is loaded, it's not finished. There's a lot more work to be done before you can go to the reporting phase. And so we call this phase data modeling. And I've got a slide on this that'll just explain that a little bit more detail before I get into that part of the demo. But just suffice to say that once the data is in the database, it's still not ready for reporting and analytics. You need to do stuff to it to make it more useful than the raw data. And I'll leave that until I talk about that in a slide during that demo. So after you've done those first 2 steps, then you can build the visualization, right? So it's almost like 80% of the work has to be done first before you can then proceed to build the visualization and finally go into the sharing using powerbi.com. And so Phil, I know I'm in a Microsoft building now, but Microsoft is a little bit guilty. Sorry, just let me yell at my dog. So I'll come here. This is my, sorry, this is very impromptu. This is my dog, Billy. You say hello, Billy.
Hi, Billy.
Sorry about that, but she's barking at me. All right, so yeah, so Microsoft's a little bit guilty sometimes at sort of creating this, I don't know, this expectation that you can just load your data up and build some really quick reports. And that is true, provided somebody's done this work for you, right? But if someone hasn't done that work, if this work hasn't been done, then you can't quickly build a report. So keep that in mind. Someone has to do the work if you want to build the quick and easy reports. All right, so I'm going to be using AdventureWorks. If you've seen a few demos at this meetup, then you may be familiar with this already. But AdventureWorks is it's a chain of bicycle stores. So it's a retail example. I like to use this because not everyone is in retail, but everyone goes shopping. And so if you walked into the bike store, this case it's the one in Australia, and you purchase some products. So in this case, it's a product, so it's a touring bike blue and a tire and a tube. And so all of these products, you take them to the counter, the operator will ring up those items at the cash register and you'll get a total on your docket. And maybe they've recorded an invoice number and the name of you as a customer and the date of the transaction and so on. And so that data gets loaded into a transactional database like the one on the right. In this case, it's a sales table. I think my PowerPoint slides have got an auto advance on them, which is very annoying. I should have turned that off. And so in this case, you can see how the 5 transactional items that were purchased on this invoice all map to a single row in this transactional table. So that's the data that we're dealing with. And hopefully the fact that you're at this user group, you have some understanding of how that works. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a demo, and I'm going to do a data acquisition demo. There are, in fact, I'll show you a couple of demos. So there are a few different ways that you can load data. In fact, as I said, there's sort of 150 to 200 different types of data connectors. But for the first demo, I'm going to load some data from a CSV file. And I'm just going to bring that up on the screen and I'll open this CSV. I just want to get my Zoom it restarted as well. So while that opens. Okay, so this is looking inside that first CSV file. This data is very old, it's 2001, but just put that aside. And you can see this is just a bog standard CSV file. In fact, this file's got, it's just over 1,000 rows in it. And I need to load this data into Power BI. And in fact, I've got 3 separate files that have sales for 3 separate years. And so if you've ever done this type of work at work, where someone sends you a CSV and you're opening and cutting and pasting, then this particular process that I'm about to show you is a very exciting process. So here I am, I've got a blank Power BI desktop file, and I'm going to say I want to get data, but I'm not going to say from a CSV file, because if I was to do this, I would have to specify the exact file that I want to load. And I would need to do that 3 times if I wanted to load those 3 files. So instead, I'm going to use one of the more advanced techniques in Power BI, and that is I'm going to select from a folder. Here it is. So I'm going to select from a folder. So I'm going to connect directly to a folder on my computer. And in fact, it's this folder here, the one that contains my file. So I'm going to copy the path and I'm just going to paste the path into Power BI. Technically, this is Power Query. So Power Query operating inside the Power BI product wrapper, Power BI desktop product wrapper. So when I connect to that, you can see I've got 3 files and there's a few options here, but I'm going to press this magic button, combine and transform. And when I do that, I get a wizard pops up on the screen, and just there it is. So here's my wizard. Now, the best way to think about this wizard is Power BI is saying, teach me how to process a single file. And once I know how to process a single file, I'll do it every time I find another file. So we train it to operate on a single file, and then we tell it to process all the files that it finds. So that's the basic process. So I'm just going to take the first file that it finds, it looks at the file, it analyzes the CSV. You can see it's based on the first 200 rows. So I say, fine, give me the defaults. And that, just go ahead and do that second. Now, let me see if it's, I need to just switch windows. There is actually a little bug out of interest where this window incorrectly sits behind the Power BI window. So I just needed to bring it to the front. Okay, so what happened then was the wizard did a whole lot of heavy lifting for me. It's actually created all of these are all queries. So they're sets of instructions to go and do the processing that I just discussed. And this is a little bit more complex and a bit out of scope. But within the context of what I just said, this query here, this is the one that says, teach me how to deal with a single file. And this one here is, okay, now I know how to do a single file, I'm going to execute that process for every file that I find. And as long as you understand that, it's pretty much straightforward. So I'm going to go back to this query and I'm just going to do a couple of things. So I might choose some columns. I don't want to load all the columns. This is pretty hard to do if you're just dealing with raw CSV. It's really easy to do inside Power Query. So I want the product code, the date of the order, the customer number, the store number, let me take the quantity, the sales amount, the tax amount, and the product cost. So I've picked sort of 6 or 7 columns there, maybe 8, and I'll click OK. And so those other columns just won't get loaded. So it's a great UI to allow me to choose what data I want. And then I just notice here that this order date column says it's ABC, and in fact, I want to change that to a date. and it doesn't like me doing that. So I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to select all the columns and I'll do an auto detection. So Power Query will detect the data type for me. And it's a bit hard to tell, but it actually detected this column as a date time column, which is correct, but I don't want date time. And so I'm going to change that to a date. And so I'm able to actually transform the data before I load it to give me what I want. All right, so that's pretty much it. So I've got the file the way I want it, but now this query is not working. And there's a few reasons for this, but basically I've changed this query and therefore I need to go back and change the second query. And so there's a lot behind this. As I said, I can't sort of go into a lot of detail, but you can see here that in this column is the name of the source file. So this is the data for 2001. And if I click on this drop-down list, you'll see that there's multiple files representing all those files in that folder. So I will do a detect data type here as well. So I'll select everything, transform, detect data type. It is worth pointing out that when I do these steps inside Power Query, what I'm actually doing is recording a set of instructions on how to process the file. This is very different to if you were cutting and pasting from a CSV into Excel. If you cut and paste into Excel and then delete the columns, you're destroying the original data to create a new subset of the data, and it's a one-off, non-repeatable process. That's not the way Power Query works. It records the instructions, and if you want to go back to a previous state, you can step back through the instructions and get back to where you were before. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that if I come here and switch to the advanced editor view, you can see that this is a language. Now, believe it or not, this language is called M, and there's some strange languages out there, right? There's C, R, M. There's actually there was a language called S. So it's a very powerful language underneath the hood. And even though there's a nice user interface for the people like you and I, there is actually a very powerful language under the hood, which if you so desire, you can get involved with. So look, I think that's fine. I'm just going to go close and apply, and we'll let that data go ahead and load. And then I'm going to build a visual before, and then I'll go ahead and load some more data. So it just takes a moment to process the files, and I'm going to add a visual. So there's just a bit of a lag at the moment. I don't know if any of you who do use Power BI Desktop have noticed just the last couple of releases, there's been a bit of a lag between when you load the data and when it becomes available for editing. So you can just see, I think it's also a little bit worse when I'm doing a team screen share. All right, so I'm just quickly going to add the order date, and I'll just bring in the sales amount, and very quickly and easily I'm able to create a very basic chart showing me the sales over time. And if you've ever had to do that cut and paste task, you will appreciate how easy that is. And of course, the real benefit comes when you get a new file. Right? So now someone's going to send me the new CSV for the next year, in this case 15, 17 years ago. But if I drop a new file in that data folder, there's no longer 3 files in the folder, there are 4. And if I come and refresh that query now, what Power Query does is it deletes all the data that it previously loaded. It goes back into the folder and repeats the instructions over again. And when it repeats the instructions, it finds an extra file, and all of that time that you used to cut and paste has basically been given back to you as time to invest in something that's more important. All right, so I see one gentleman in the front row that thought that was pretty good, so I'm glad. Hopefully everyone else knows you can do that, but anyway. All right, so let me go and grab some more data. So this is from a CSV, but one of the features of Power Query, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to rename this. One of the features of Power Query is that you can bring data from the different locations. So I just want to rename this, and you can see this, it's a little bit laggy. Give me a second. would have helped if I didn't hit refresh. Rename, I want to call this my sales table. That's the one that I showed you before in the AdventureWorks database. Okay, so now I'm going to get some more data, and I'll go get some data, this time from SQL Server. So I have SQL Server on my computer. It could be a SQL Server on your network, which is traditionally the way that you would do this. And I import from SQL Server. I've got a few different databases here, but here's my AdventureWorks. And I'm going to bring in 3 tables of data. So customer, products, and territory. And if you do have some experience, these are dimension tables, or master data tables. All right, so the products table gives me a list of all the products that I sell. The customers, a list of all the customers. So I'm going to load that. I will click transform first. I always like to click transform. That launches the Power Query editor. Notice up here, this is about the only place you'll see the words Power Query inside Power BI is once you launch the Power Query editor. And so here are my tables, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the customers table just for illustration purposes, and I'm going to get rid of some columns here as well. So choose columns. I don't want everything. So I definitely need the customer number, and I want their name and their date of birth, maybe how much they earn, what their occupation is, gender, that'll do. So just to grab a few of these columns and I'll click OK. There are many, many cool features, but one of the cool features of Power Query, if I right click on this last step that I just created, the step that told me or told Power Query which columns that I write, and come down here to view native query, if you do have any SQL background, you'll identify this as being a native SQL query. So what Power Query actually does, it's smart enough to understand that it's talking to a SQL database, and it basically writes the instructions for the SQL database, and it says, can you go and execute this query on my behalf and then just give me the results? So this adds phenomenal performance improvement versus having Power Query trying to do something that's better suited for a SQL database. So that's called query folding, and it's a foundation part of the tool. All right, so I didn't mean to do that. So back in here, I'm just going to change this date here again. So I'll change this to a date. I don't want date time. But if I want to enhance my data, so I've got the name of the customer here, but maybe I want something different. I want their initial followed by their surname, right? Initial space surname. Well, I can enhance my raw data. So I can add a column, and I'm going to use columns from example. Now, this is one of the fantastic features that comes bundled inside Power Query. And
Matt, can you zoom in? Matt, can you just zoom in on this a little bit here? Because I think it's quite a good bit to zoom in on.
Yeah, so this is Microsoft investing a lot of time and money in making it easier for you to do a task. So rather than forcing you to learn the language, it's trying to help you do the task in more of a, you show me what you want and I'll give it to you. And so you can see here this customer name, John Yang, Eugene Huang. So what I can do here, and I'm going to have to zoom out a bit, I think, Phil, because otherwise you won't be able to see these 2 columns. But in this column, I'm just going to type what I want to see. I will. So I'll come up here and I'll go J Yang. Yeah, I can't see it. So there it is, John Yang. So if I go J space Y-A-N-G, and I hit enter, okay, Power Query wasn't able to help. But the next one is Eugene Huang. So if I go E space H-U-A-N-G, enter, and Power Query is smart enough to detect the pattern based on the 2 examples that I provided, and now it's gone ahead and generated that data. And so this is now my, I'll call it my short name. And notice up here that there's actually that language that I showed you before, that functional language called M, it actually generated the code. It inferred the code from the set of instructions that I use to demonstrate what I want. And so, you know, this is the way of the future. This sort of, I don't know if it's artificial intelligence or machine learning, or maybe some sort of crossover between the 2 of those things. And so now I've added my new column, and so I've been able to enhance my data in preparation for loading. All right, just to save a bit of time, I'll show you another way that I can load data into Power Query. And this time I need a calendar table for my reporting for the next stage. And remember, I showed you that it's quite a powerful language under the hood. So I've actually developed this as a calendar table. In fact, more correctly, this is the programming instructions on how to generate the calendar table. And I keep this literally in OneNote. And when I generate a new report, I just cut and paste it from OneNote. And that's what I'm going to do here. So Control C to copy. I'll come down, I'll create a new query. It'll be a blank query. And I'll switch to the advanced editor and paste my code in the advanced editor. And that's literally all I have to do. Power Query will actually then go and generate all of the data that I need to create that calendar. I'll just rename this calendar. And with that, I'll just go close and apply. It'll take a moment just to refresh. And at this point in time, you can see there are now 5 tables over here on the right-hand side. And if I jump into these tables, you can see, so here's the products table. So basically everything that you saw before. All right, so let me just wrap up with a slide on that and see if there's any questions on data acquisition. So this is the first phase, getting the data into the tool. Still not ready for reporting, but we need to get the data into the tool so you can import from any source, do the pre-manipulation that you need for reporting purposes. One of the foundation rules is do not just load what is in your source. You'll get yourself in trouble if you just import what's in the source. You need to be selective about what you import. And if you want to learn, there's a more powerful language underneath the hood. It's certainly an easy tool to learn. It's menu driven. It's actually a lot easier than the DAX language to learn. If you learn it, you can take those skills into Excel and has a lot of uses outside of Power BI. So highly recommended. I've got some more learning here. In fact, I've got some QR codes at the end and a discount code if anyone wants to have a look at some of my training courses that I've got available. Okay, any questions, Phil, if you want to sort of, any questions from that end?
If you had to aggregate the data, because you have too much data, you could do it in Power Query, yes?
Absolutely you can, but I would say you shouldn't. And can I just ask, was it David, sorry, do you have a database background?
I do.
Yep, and there's a reason I asked that, and so if you come from a traditional SQL database world, in a traditional database world, we tend to try and aggregate and summarize the data so that you get performance improvements during runtime, and that's a very common and appropriate approach to a relational database tool. But this is not a relational database; it's a reporting database, and for reasons out beyond the scope of tonight, there are good reasons to load the low-level detailed data, the lowest level of granularity that you will ever need for reporting. And there's amazing compression and performance optimizations built under the hood, and you can and should expect to get those. And so if you've got a 1 gigabyte source data at the lowest level of granularity, you can and should expect between 80 to 90% compression. So your report may only take up 100 megabytes. 1 gigabyte will compress to 100 megabyte after you've loaded the data. Now, it does depend on your data, and there's a whole lot of caveats that go along with that. And so, and the reason I'd like to make this point, David, is that it often, the answer is yes, it can, but maybe it's not the best approach given that the tool is designed differently. So, yeah, hence my qualification. All right, well, I'm going to move on. I'm just conscious of time. Phil, what time do we have? Are you expecting me to wrap up? Because I can waffle a bit, just so that I know.
Go to on the hour?
To the top of the hour? Okay, so I'll step it up a fraction and just try and move a little bit faster. All right, so, well, perhaps I'll focus on some core concepts rather than try and do everything within the time. I'll make sure that I do a few things well. So I just want to talk about this term data modeling, because it's actually not a term that business people typically understand or have heard before. It's an IT term, and more correctly, I think it's actually a business intelligence term. And I really like this analogy of what data modeling is. So if you think about clay modeling for a moment, clay as a raw material is a really useful, capable, flexible raw material, but in its raw form, you can't do much with it, right? You actually have to prepare the raw material, and best to give it to someone who knows what they're doing to prepare it in the optimal way so that you get something that's more useful at the end. And that's a great analogy for data modeling, because data is just a raw material, but in its raw form, it's just not ready for the reporting that you need to use. And so if you give it to someone like a data modeler, someone who knows what they're doing, they can prepare and enhance that raw data to make it more useful and more fit for purpose than it otherwise would. And so there are lots of things that need to be done, including joining tables of data together, writing formulas, doing formatting, giving good business names, understanding the business logic. There's a lot of things that fall under this data modeling topic, and I'll touch on a couple of those in a demo now. So we've got our tables of data loaded. I'm going to remove the order date from my sales table now and jump over, and let's have a look at the data model. So this is called the data model, and I've got the 5 tables that I've loaded. And this is the first phase of data modeling, is to make sure that you've got the relationships between these tables working correctly. So given time, I'm just going to quickly go ahead and create these relationships. But the best analogy for this is it's like VLOOKUP. If you had a table of sales and you knew the customer number, but you didn't know the customer name, in an Excel world, you'd go and write a VLOOKUP, go to the customer's table, grab the name and bring it back so that I can see the customer's name. And so we don't have to do that in Power BI. All we do is we create relationships between different tables. So the order date is related to the calendar date, the customer key is related to the customer's table, the product key is related to the product key in the sales table, and the territory key tells me which store the sale occurred in. And so literally with that quick drag and drop, and admittedly some clean data, doesn't work as well when the data is not clean, I've now created a model that will just work. And so now I'm able to bring in my calendar year, and so I'm just going to change this here because this is, I don't want to add up, this little sigma here says add up the calendar years. Well, I certainly don't want to do that. And these are whole numbers. So I'll just quickly make that change. And at this point in time, I basically get the same view that I had before. The difference is that I'm now using 2 tables. I'm using the calendar year from my calendar table, and I'm using the sales data from my sales table. So I'm going to build another visual. So this time I'll do a table, and all of these tables will now work together. So I'm going to bring my customer occupation into my table, and I'm also going to bring in the sales amount into that table. And just very quickly and easily, I can see the total sales value that was purchased by each of the customers based on their customer occupation, the type of business that they're, or the type of job role that they have. Now, when you drag a column like this, and once again, notice that this column is a column of numbers. That's what the sigma basically says, is this is a column of numbers. If you put it into a visual, Power BI, without you even asking, will add up those numbers for you. All right, so it's we call this an implicit measure. So it just knows that you want to aggregate, or you probably want to aggregate those numbers. And so you can do that, but it's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to write a formula, and this is using the DAX language. And so instead of just dragging that column, I'm going to write a new formula, which is called a measure. So I right click on the sales table and write a new measure. And this measure is going to include a few things. First of all, the good business name for this is total sales. So good business name is the first thing. Secondly, what is the business logic to calculate the concept of business sales? I need to add up the sales amount column in my sales table. The third thing is, how does the business want to see this information formatted? And the answer to that would be, I want to see, say, currency. So we'll do New Zealand dollars and come over here and change the decimal places to 0 decimal places. Nothing's appeared on the screen because this is the implicit measure, but over here I have my new measure. If I drag and drop that in, it didn't pick up my currency. So let me just go and do that again. And I probably have to do the 0 again, would be my guess. So I don't want all those decimal places. All right, so I've actually just invested a little bit of my life doing something that you could argue, why did I bother? Because you can see the numbers the same. But trust me when I tell you that it is worth investing time and effort to build these measures. If you build the measures, you get to give it a better name than sales amount, better formatting, and you're learning the DAX language. Anyone that learns the DAX language will be a more powerful user than someone who can only drag a column. All right, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to create another one of these quickly, which will be the total cost. So new measure, I want to know how much is the cost of the products that we sold. So total cost is equal to sum of the products, so the cost column. So the sales product cost. I think I'm going to skip over the formatting just to save a little bit of time so you can understand the benefit of doing that formatting. So there's the total sales, there's the total cost. Both of these are measures. I've removed the other one now. Okay, now here's the kicker. How much profit did we make from the sales? Now, not everyone's in retail, but the profit is the sell price minus the cost price. Okay, now I sold for 29 million, my cost was 17 million, orders of magnitude, I made about $12 million profit. The trouble is, there is nowhere in this data that tells me how much profit I made. If I jump to the sales table and have a look in this sales table, there is no column that tells me how much profit that I made. And so one of the benefits of data modeling using measures is you can create new data. You can apply your business rules to your existing data to create new concepts that are not inherently available in the data. And so I can create a new measure, and this will be total profit. And that is just simply, and now I can reuse the formulas I've already written. So it's total sales, subtract the total cost. New data. The benefit of measures is that I'm not permanently storing the answers to these formulas. These formulas are calculated on the fly, on demand. There's the $12 million profit. So that data wasn't in the source data. Of course, I had all the information I need to be able to do the creation of that insight, but the insight itself wasn't in there. And so this is modeling. I'm taking the raw data and making it more useful than it was prior to doing that calculation. And I'll just do one more measure. I'll do a quick measure. There are these inbuilt tools that will allow you to write formulas, even if you perhaps don't know how to do it. And so I'm going to do a division, and I'm going to take the total sales. No, I'm going to take the total profit and divide it by the total sales. And this will give me the percentage margin. And so just by dragging and dropping, I've been able to create a brand new measure. Unfortunately, the name's not very good and the formatting's not very good. So I'm going to call this formula, I'll call it total, I'll just call it percentage margin, I think. Percentage margin, so that's the profitability, and I need to change the format to a percentage. If it will let me, I'll just leave that as is. Okay, so, okay, we're doing okay. So a couple of other things on, oh no, I think I'll leave the modeling there and I'll jump back to my slides, and then I'll come back and we'll look at the last things we'll look at will be visualization and sharing online. So yeah, so the summary of data modeling, you should decide what you need in advance. So don't just load what's in your source, make sure you have a clear understanding of what you need. You need to prepare the raw data, so write the measures to give you these new concepts that you don't otherwise have, and then they're a completely repeatable process. So every time you use them after that, you can you basically get to use the same formula over and over again. And you can certainly learn this language yourself, but it will take a little bit of investment in your time. All right, so let's move over to visualization. So I'll jump back to my model. I'm just going to do two quick visualizations that just to show a couple of techniques. I'm going to come over to my territory table and I'm just going to put a check mark in the country column. And when I do that, Power BI smart enough to understand the concept of a country, and it realizes that a country is a geographical concept. And so it's selected a visual for me. And now that I've done that, you can see I've got a dot telling me every country that I operate in. And just by grabbing my total sales, I can bring that as the size on my map. And now I get this graphical representation of, you can see automatically that the US is the largest country, or US or Australia, and then these other countries are much smaller. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, understand that you can cross filter in Power BI. So when you click on one of these visuals, the other visuals cross filter. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But note how I'm reusing this total sales measure. And then one last thing I might do on this map is I'll come over here and I'm going to change the color. So I'll come down to the data colors and I'm going to use a formula, this percentage margin. And so instead of the color scale just being one color, based on the percentage margin, I'm going to do a diverging color. So the lower margin gets a reddy color, the highest margin gets a bluey color. And so now I'm actually able to see additional piece of information on my map where I can see that not only is North America one of the largest sales countries, but they're making a higher margin. Australia is a large sales country, but it's making a lower margin. So great visual capability. I will just do one of my other favorite little demos. I'm just going to add a line chart over here. And I'm going to put the date from my calendar table, and I'll just bring my total sales. Sorry for a bit boring sales, but it's sort of easy to do. And so I'm just going to turn this chart into a chart that's basically showing me sales by month. So starting in July 2001, all the way through time. It falls off the cliff here, but it's just because of the demo data. But look here, something happened at this data point. There was an anomaly in December 2003. And so one of the great features of Power BI I really love is this concept of artificial intelligence to help you analyze the data. So I can right click on that data point and select Analyze, Explain the Increase. And when I do that, this AI feature under the hood starts analyzing my data, and it presents me with all of the correlations it found within the data. Now, keep in mind that this data is demo data, so it's so there may not be any true insights in this data. It's been randomly generated, but and the other thing is that correlation does not necessarily mean causation, right? So just because there is a pattern doesn't mean that's what drove the result, but it's at least plausible that if you come down here, you can see, well, based on the country performance from November to December, it seems that North America drove the bulk of the increase. And so with this information, you might be able to go and do some further investigation, or it might confirm something that you already know. And if you like one or more of these visuals, you can just add them to your canvas and keep it as part of your overall report. All right, so let me go into the last piece of the puzzle. Once you've built a report, I haven't spent any time making this report look beautiful, but it's a report. I can now publish it online. So I'm just going to hit publish. Remember, I'm still in Power BI Desktop, and I'll just save the file. And then Power BI Desktop will ask me where do I want to publish the file. And I've actually created a workspace just for this demo, so a place within my powerbi.com account. And we have our Wellington pug. And now Power BI Desktop is taking a copy of everything that I developed and copying it into the cloud. And so as soon as this task is complete, I can literally, if I wanted to, I don't recommend you do this, but I could delete this file and the one online would continue to work forever. And I'm just going to open the online version. And as I said in the intro, you can now consume it through a browser, you can consume it on a Mac, you can consume it in a mobile app and various other ways. And for all intents and purposes, this is the same report, you'll get the same behavior. I can do all sorts of things, including explain the increase, that's in here as well. Why am I not seeing explain the increase? That's very interesting. It could be because I'm looking at in read-only mode. These things do have a habit of changing. The demos that I do one day, sometimes they don't work the next day because, as Jonathan mentioned, it's in constant change. So I've got a feeling that I can do explain the increase if I go into edit mode, but I'm just conscious of time.
What's the bottom option there? Analyze, Matt. What happens
So
when you go down to analyze?
Oh, thank you. I thought it was analyze in Excel. Thanks, Phil. That's why they pay you the big bucks, buddy. So there it is, analyze and explain the increase. All right. Look, there's many things that I could show, but I do want to show one more thing, and that's analyze in Excel, which is how I got confused. So if I come over to the data set here, demo is this option analyze in Excel. So remember, I've copied the entire set of data into powerbi.com. When I select analyze in Excel, what happens is I get a new Excel file that's been generated. That Excel file is copied down onto my computer, and a permanent connection is made between my Excel on my PC and powerbi.com. And once I enable that connection, you will recognize that this is the exact model that I just worked on, but it's a pivot table connected to powerbi.com. And so I can build the same type of reports that I built before using these measures. Here's another reason why you should write measures. You must have a measure to do what I'm showing you now, which is analyze in Excel. I cannot go and grab the sales column, the sales amount. This will not work. I must have a measure, and so I can drag that in. So I've now got an Excel pivot table, and if I save this pivot table, I'll just call it demo. I've already done one called demo, no surprises. And I'll save it on my PC. I just want to show you the size of this file because this is pretty important. This demo file is 16 kilobytes. And the reason it's so small is it doesn't have any data in it. It only has the set of instructions on how to build the pivot table and where to fetch the data when it's required. Okay, so Analyze in Excel gives you the power of Excel on your desktop without having to basically have these huge databases or very large Excel spreadsheets. Okay, so look, we're probably out of time. So let me just mention, I do have some online training courses. Everyone's at a different stage of learning, but if you would like to investigate some of my training courses, there are 2 links, one for my instructor-led training, one for my video on demand training. And I've got a coupon code there for if anyone's interested, I'll give you a 20% discount. Just use that coupon code. Phil, I will send you these slides. Maybe you can stick them in the meetup live or something like that. So with that, are there any questions from anyone? Sorry for the obviously very fast, but hopefully broad coverage.
One question, Matt. With the Analyze in Excel, what license requirements does the end Excel user need to have?
Good question. They must have a Power BI Pro account as a minimum. So you cannot do Analyze in Excel with the free account. So you must have paid to do the sharing. So if you've got a Pro account yourself, $150 a year, then you'll be able to use Analyze in Excel yourself. Yeah. Good question.
Thank you.
Matt, another question. So, you know, like in Power Query, you have features to join different tables and basically create M functions and do it as some part of modeling. How would you choose where you would do joining in Power Query and functions in Power Query versus modeling in DAX and DAX measures and calculated colors?
It's a very good question. And so, you know, if I could just sort of paraphrase, often there are two ways you can do something. How do you choose, right? So for example, yeah, you could choose to join the customers table with the sales table, and you could do that in Power Query, for example. So look, there's no one right or wrong answer. As a general rule, I would refer you back to this slide here, where I say, you know, there are these four logical stages. So my preference is to do the table shaping in Power Query so that it's all in one place, and then do the data modeling inside Power BI, including the relationships. There are exceptions. So let's say I wanted a column in my customer table that told me, is this a big customer or a small customer? Now, technically, I would argue that that's a data preparation step, right? That perhaps it should be done inside Power Query because I'm adding a new column to my customers table. I think there's a fair argument that that's a data preparation step. But let's think about the problem. If I want to work out if a customer is large or small, I have to be able to understand how much sales does that customer have. Now, when I'm in Power Query, my customers table doesn't contain the sales. The sales are in another table. So if I want to build this concept of large or small customers in Power Query, I'm going to have to create a join between the customers table and the sales table. Once I've got that join, I will then need to do sort of like a group by, add up the values in the sales column, and then do a conditional column to say anything greater than, say, $5,000 is large, anything less is small. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to do that inside Power Query. However, if I did it inside Power BI with the modeling engine, I've already got the relationship because I need that anyway. I've already got the measure because I need that anyway. And so whenever I can leverage a broader set of the model to make a task easier, I tend to defer to doing it inside the modeling tool. If I can do it without recreating relationships, without recreating aggregations, then I would prefer to do it inside Power Query. It's a broad rule. Any other? No worries. Any other questions?
I have a question regarding the data acquisition. Let's say that I have a customer and who wants to give me like 3 years of data in Excel format, but he got his own limitations and he used the Excel sheets like a weekly. Yeah? So there would be a lot of Excel sheets. So if I follow your approach, your strategy, will that work? Like you show one store in a folder and do one Excel sheet and then apply the formula?
So there's definitely a pattern for you to follow to solve that particular use case. So this is combine multiple sheets. So it's slightly different, but in short, yes, there is a pattern. Or it doesn't. I reckon my online search is not working. Let me try this. Combine. I'll try using Google. There it is. So yeah, there's something wrong with my site search. So I can send this link. I'm just going to add it to the chat, Phil. Or you could just do what I did, of course. I don't even know how to add this to a chat. Oh, there it is. All right, so this article explains exactly that use case. So, and I've got a YouTube video apparently, which you can have a look at as well. And yeah, so this video explains it. So there's a couple of little tricks that you need to implement, and there's a couple of different ways to execute it. And in fact, I've got another, this is actually more complex. So this is multiple sheets from multiple workbooks. So this is where a customer gives you one workbook with 52 sheets and they give you 3 of them. Right, so there is a pattern that you can follow, and I cover it in this video. I've got lots of stuff like that on my website. So yeah, if you just have a look, the good stuff, that I think everyone could benefit from is here under knowledge base. So all of these are basically blog articles which I've written. Sorry, it's getting late. That I've written over the years, and so these are good foundational concepts, and then there's like literally hundreds of other articles. Generally speaking, what I do is I go out and work and help clients. When I find something that I think is useful, I just write an article about it and post it on my blog. So there's a lot of stuff that's there if you want to look into that.
Yeah, I have other questions regarding the data sources. Like for a given any big enterprises, there are multiple challenges when you have to access the data sources. One of them being like the developers. We don't know whether you should be giving the full access to the end databases for them to retrieve the data. Like without knowing how much data they want to actually put into the Power BI. And another biggest problem is how do we handle the sensitive information? Like for example, HR data, finance data, employee salaries. There are a lot of sensitive information. So how do we handle these situations? Whether it's a governance issue or is it within the Power BI thing, or is it outside the process by setting up governance?
I think it's both is the short answer. So if I could break it into 2 pieces. So how do you, the way I would recommend you at least investigate getting access to the data would be using data flows. Now, I don't know how much you know about data flows, but so so data flows, one word, lowercase, basically is Power Query in the cloud. And one of the good things about data flows for the use case that you just described is that you can build a data flow that connects to your SQL data source. You can decide which columns come in and which columns don't come in, and then expose that to your end users. So you don't have to give them basically read access to the underlying SQL tables. You can do that through data flows and just present it as a table. That doesn't necessarily address the second issue, which is HR data and sensitive data. What I can tell you is you will have to manage that separately. Power BI does have row level security. So you can create these roles, but you still have to give access to someone to connect to the data and then basically implement the security within Power BI so that the people who are allowed to see the data can see it, people who are not allowed to see the data can't see it. So there's definitely work to be done there, and the integration is pretty solid.
All right, so we don't have any inbuilt encryption algorithms to change the real data to some like kind of fake data. There's no encryption algorithms inbuilt.
Well, there's definitely encryption algorithms that work through the gateway, for example. So when your data is in transit between A and B, then it's encrypted. When it's at rest between in the cloud, it's also encrypted. But when it's presented on the screen, it's the unencrypted version. And the assumption is that you've assigned access to someone who's allowed to see that data. So it doesn't desensitize the data with some sort of automatic algorithm to create a desensitized version of the data. I can also tell you that one of the benefits of working with Microsoft is it works across the stack. And so these sensitivity labels, which are pretty well deployed now within the business, confidential, internal use, public information, if you assign these labels through your SQL databases and your Power BI reports, they will actually flow through to analyze in Excel and those types of things. So if you go and invest in the time in getting those sensitivity assignments done correctly, it will flow through. So you're not sort of redoing it at every step. but there's work here, and your question implies that you understand that there's work here, right? So yeah, it's not a silver bullet to solve all those problems. There is work that needs to be done.
All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Yeah, that was amazing. I know that Power BI is just such a big product now. So many features. It's hard to actually cover even all the intro ones, but I think you did a really nice job of breaking it down into the main milestones and steps that are really important. But as you know, just each one of those steps along the way, there's just so many cool features and useful things that you can do without even writing a line of code, which is pretty amazing too. But thank you very much for taking the time out and presenting to the group.
Just a quick question. Are you online courses on Udemy or Coursera? The online.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking to someone in the left of the room. I didn't realise you're talking to me. Sorry. So we do have a course through Udemy. So just quick plug. My website. I'm in business with Ken Pools. And so if you might have heard of Power Query Academy, Ken Pools and I run this website called skillwave.training. So we're producing a suite of online video on demand and coached content. So this is where you'll find most of our stuff. We do have a bit of a teaser training course at Udemy, but it's very thin. These are huge topics and very comprehensive coverage here. The Power Query course, for example, is like 25 hours of video content, orders of magnitude, something like that.
And do you do all levels? Do you do intro, intermediate, and advanced, or do you mostly do? Yeah,
so we have no, I'd say we cover the spectrum. I mean, we're not ludicrous, right? If I can quote the Tesla different models. So I wouldn't say we're ludicrous mode, but say Power Query, for example, we have this fundamentals, which is just a free, very basic course, and then there's a more intermediate and advanced version, and that's the same for many things.